The gunshot cracked through the rain before she even saw his face. She stumbled into his arms, blood not hers, fear not new to him. Their eyes met, hers wide with terror, his unreadable and dark, and something ancient stirred in Kang Min-ho's chest, something he thought had died with his mother. Welcome to Afro-Korean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, like, share, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance stories. Ava Bello had not meant to end up in Seoul working as a private chef for one of the city's most feared men. She had meant to spend a year abroad, save money, go home to Lagos with a portfolio and a plan. Instead, she found herself standing in the marble kitchen of the Kang estate at midnight, dodging security dogs and men in black suits who never smiled. Kang Min-ho ran his family's empire the way his father had taught him, with silence, precision, and an iron will nobody dared test. He was 34, unmarried, and rumored to have ice instead of blood. His enemies feared him. His allies respected him. His own family barely knew him. That night, the rain had driven a wounded rival's courier straight into the estate's outer gate, and in the chaos, Ava had been the one closest to the gunfire, the one who nearly took a bullet meant for no one at all. Min-ho had thrown himself between her and the shooter without thinking. It was instinct, not strategy, a first for him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low, gripping her arms. "I don't think so." Her voice shook. She looked up at him, so terrified and somehow still furious. "You could have warned me this job came with bullets." Despite the tension humming in his jaw, the corner of his mouth twitched. No one spoke to him like that. No one dared. The next day, the estate buzzed with quiet unease. Guards were doubled, cameras rechecked. Min-ho said nothing about the night before, but he watched Ava from his office window as she moved through the garden, arms crossed against the morning chill. He told himself it was concern for staff safety. Nothing more. Later that night, he found her in the kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed, stirring a pot of stew that smelled like home, plantain, pepper, and something achingly familiar, though he couldn't place it. She startled when she saw him in the doorway. "You don't sleep?" she asked. "Much." He stepped closer, studying the pot instead of her, though his eyes kept drifting back. "What is this?" "Ifo-rero, my mother's recipe." She hesitated, then, almost daring him, ladled a small bowl and set it in front of him. "Try it before you judge." He did. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kang Min-ho tasted something that made him feel like a person instead of a weapon. A few days later, word spread through the household staff that the boss had requested Ava cook for him personally, every night, no exceptions. The other staff exchanged glances. No one questioned Kang Min-ho. No one ever had a reason to. Ava told herself it meant nothing. He was particular, powerful men often were. But she noticed things, how he lingered in doorways longer than necessary, how his guards suddenly treated her with a new deference, how once she caught him watching her laugh with the gardener and his expression had gone flat and cold in a way that made the gardener suddenly remember an errand elsewhere. "Jealous," she teased one evening, testing him, testing herself. "I don't get jealous," Min-ho said, voice even, eyes anything but. She smiled and said nothing more. But she noticed the gardener was transferred to another property by the end of the week. By the following week, small things began to appear in her room, imported spices she'd once mentioned missing from home, a new set of kitchen knives, a soft blanket for the cold Seoul nights. No notes, no explanations, just quiet, deliberate proof that someone was paying attention to a life she thought no one in this house cared to notice. "Did you do this?" she asked him directly, holding up the spices. "Do what?" He didn't look up from his papers, but the ghost of a smile betrayed him. "Kang Min-ho," she crossed her arms. "Thank you." He looked at her then, something unguarded flickering behind his eyes before the wall came back up. "Don't get used to it." She did anyway. The following morning brought Madame Kang, Min-ho's grandmother, and with her, the announcement of the family's annual gala, a night where rival families, political allies, and old enemies gathered under one roof to remind each other who still held power. Attendance was mandatory for anyone bearing the Kang name, and strictly forbidden for staff. Min-ho found himself in the kitchen that evening, watching Ava scrub a pan with more force than necessary, her jaw tight. "Upset," he observed. "Not upset." She scrubbed harder. I just think it's funny that I'm good enough to cook your meals but not good enough to be seen in the same room as your family." Something in his chest twisted uncomfortably. Before he could stop himself, he said almost carelessly, almost like a joke, "Come then. Be my date to the gala." She laughed, assuming he meant nothing by it. "Sure, and I'll wear a $3 million dress while I'm at it," he said, and walked away before she could see that he wasn't joking at all. That evening, a garment bag arrived at her door, carried by two of his most trusted men, who set it down with the reverence of handling something sacred. Inside was a gown the color of midnight, embroidered with hand-sewn crystals that caught the light like starlight trapped in silk. A dress that, she would later learn, had been commissioned from Seoul's most exclusive designer and insured for exactly $3 million. Ava stood frozen, staring at it, heart hammering. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was a declaration. The night of the gala, the ballroom of the Kang estate glittered with old money and older grudges. Politicians mingled with men whose fortunes had darker origins. Every eye in the room belonged to someone who mattered, someone with power, someone who had spent years learning how to read danger in a smile. When Ava walked through the doors in the midnight gown, the room did not simply notice her. It stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. She was curvy and radiant, dark skin luminous against the gown's deep blue, her natural hair styled into an elegant crown that made her look. Several guests would later whisper, like visiting royalty no one had been warned about. Min-ho, standing near the terrace doors in his black suit, felt the air leave his lungs. He had seen countless beautiful women in this ballroom over the years. None of them had ever made his heart forget how to beat. Who is she? A rival heir murmured near the bar, already moving toward her with the confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. Min-ho was there before the man finished the sentence, his hand settling at the small of Ava's back with quiet, absolute possession. "She's with me," he said, voice low enough for only the man to hear, but sharp enough that the message landed like a blade. The rival heir raised his hands in mock surrender and retreated, but not before flashing Ava a smile that made Min-ho's jaw tighten. "You didn't have to do that," Ava whispered as they moved deeper into the ballroom. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." Word moved through the ballroom like wildfire. The untouchable Kang Min-ho had brought a date to the family gala for the first time in his life, and she was stunning, unfamiliar, and clearly not from any family the guests recognized. Whispers followed them across the marble floor. "She's beneath him," one older woman murmured to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice enough. Ava's spine stiffened, but before she could respond, Min-ho leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. "Ignore them. You outshine every woman in this room and they know it. That's why they're talking." His confidence steadied her more than she wanted to admit. They danced once, his hand firm at her waist, her palm resting against his chest where she could feel his heart beating faster than his calm expression let on. For a moment, surrounded by enemies and gossip and glittering chandeliers, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. "Why did you really invite me?" she asked quietly, searching his eyes. His answer was almost a whisper. "Because I couldn't imagine tonight without you in it." Later that night, on the terrace away from prying eyes, the tension between them finally cracked. The cold Seoul air bit at her bare shoulders, and without a word he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her, his hands lingering at her collarbone a moment too long. "You confuse me," Ava admitted, voice barely above a breath. "One minute you're a stranger giving orders, the next you're—" She gestured helplessly at the jacket, the dress. "The entire impossible night, this. I confuse myself too," he admitted, something raw breaking through his usual composure. "I didn't plan for you. For me, I plan everything, Ava. Every deal, every risk, every enemy I've ever destroyed. I've never once planned for someone to walk into my kitchen and rearrange everything I thought I understood about myself." She swallowed hard, the space between them shrinking without either of them quite deciding to move. "And what happens now?" "Now," he said, voice rough. "I stop pretending I don't want you." Kiss that followed was not gentle. It was hunger held back for weeks, tension finally breaking, his hand cradling her jaw like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. She melted into him, fingers curling into his shirt, every rational thought dissolving into the heat between them. Somewhere in the ballroom behind them, a rival family's photographer caught a single frame through the terrace glass. Kang Min-ho, the untouchable, kissing a woman no one in that world had ever heard of. By the following morning, that photograph had already begun its journey into the wrong hands. Ava woke wrapped in unfamiliar sheets that smelled like him, sunlight spilling gold across the room, and for a moment, pure happiness flooded her chest before reality crept back in with sharp, cruel edges. What had she done? She was staff. He was untouchable. Whatever last night had been, however real it felt, daylight had a way of turning fantasies into mistakes. She was gone before he woke, dressed and slipping out through the garden exit, telling herself it was easier this way, that leaving first meant she wouldn't have to watch him regret it. She was wrong about one thing. Kang Min-ho did not regret it. And when he woke to an empty bed, something in him went cold and sharp with panic he hadn't felt since childhood. He found her an hour later in the estate's laundry room of all places, folding linens with shaking hands, clearly trying to disappear into ordinary work. "You left," he said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was closer to a wound. "I thought it would be easier," she admitted, not looking at him. "For both of us. This morning you'd wake up and remember who you are, who I am, and stop." His voice cut through her spiral, firm but not harsh. He crossed the room and took the linens gently from her hands, setting them aside, forcing her to look at him. "I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly who you are. Nothing about last night was a mistake to me." "You don't know that," she whispered, voice cracking. "People like you don't choose people like me. Not really. Not permanently." Something fierce flashed across his face. "Then let me prove you wrong." That evening the storm arrived, not of weather but of consequence. Min-ho's second-in-command, detective-turned-fixer Baek Do-hyun, appeared in his office with a grim expression and a tablet in hand. "Photos circulating," Do-hyun said without preamble. "Rival families already have it. They're asking who she is, where she came from, whether she's a weakness they can use against you." Min-ho's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "No one touches her. That's easier said than protected," Do-hyun warned. "The Choi family's been looking for leverage against you for months. A woman you're clearly attached to, with no family power to protect her. That's exactly the kind of leverage they'd kill for." Following day, Min-ho called Ava into his study, his expression unreadable in a way that made her stomach twist with dread. "There's something you need to know," he said, and explained plainly and without softening the danger exactly what the photograph had set into motion. Ava's blood ran cold. "So I've made things worse for you." His voice was firm, immovable. "You've made things worth protecting. There's a difference." "That's not an answer, Min-ho. That's a deflection." She stood, packing, fear making her voice sharp. "I came to Korea to build a career, not to become a target in some mafia war I don't even understand." "Keep you safe," he said, closing the distance between them. "I swear it. You can't promise that." "Just did." A few days later, an unfamiliar car followed her from the market, slow and deliberate, close enough to make her heart pound the entire walk home. She said nothing about it, not wanting to add fuel to a fire already threatening to consume them both, but Min-ho's people had already reported it before she reached the gates. That night he found her in the garden, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "You should have told me," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "How did you know? I know everything that happens near you now." He turned to face her fully, something desperate breaking through his usual composure. "Ava, I need you to understand something. I am not a gentle man. My world is not a gentle world. But I would burn every alliance, every empire I've built to the ground before I let anyone touch you." Breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. "Why me?" "Because for the first time in my life," he admitted, voice rough, "I'm not afraid of losing power. I'm afraid of losing you." The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. She closed the distance this time, her hands finding his chest, his heart hammering beneath her palm exactly the way it had the night of the gala. "Then don't lose me," she whispered. He didn't. Not that night, wrapped together against the cold with nothing but honesty between them, and not in the weeks that followed when he began quietly restructuring his security around her presence, when his guards stopped questioning her authority in the house, when the staff began referring to her, carefully, respectfully, as someone who mattered. But peace in Kang Min-ho's world never lasted long. By the end of the following week, the Choi family made their move, not with violence, not yet, but with an invitation of their own, one dressed in silk and smiling teeth. Chairman Choi requested a private meeting, ostensibly to discuss a business truce. Min-ho knew better than to trust it, but refusing outright would be read as weakness, and weakness invited war. "Have to go," he told Ava that morning, tension coiled tight in his shoulders. "Do-hyun will stay with you, don't leave the estate. Min-ho, please." His voice cracked just slightly, just enough to show her how much this cost him to ask. "Let me have peace of mind about one thing today," she nodded, though dread sat heavy in her stomach the entire day, a feeling that only worsened as evening fell and he didn't return on schedule. By nightfall, Do-hyun's phone rang with news that turned his face gray. He hung up and turned to Ava with an expression that made her legs go weak before he even spoke. "There's been an ambush," he said. Min-ho's convoy was hit on the way back. "He's alive, but it's bad." Hospital lights felt too bright, too clinical, too cold against the terror clawing through Ava's chest as she paced the private wing where Min-ho had been rushed. Blood soaked through the bandages on his shoulder and side, the doctors moving with the efficiency of people accustomed to gunshot wounds, though nothing about their calm made her feel any less like the world was ending. "He's stable," a doctor finally told her, "but the next 24 hours matter." She sat beside his bed long after visiting hours ended, refusing to leave despite Do-hyun's gentle attempts to convince her to rest, her hand wrapped tightly around Min-ho's, willing him to wake up. "You don't get to leave me," she whispered fiercely, tears finally breaking free. "Not after everything you promised. You don't get to be the one who leaves." Sometime near dawn, his fingers twitched against hers. "I heard that," he rasped, eyes fluttering open, a weak but genuine smile tugging at his lips despite the pain evident on his face. "Wouldn't dream of breaking a promise to you." Relief crashed through her so violently she nearly sobbed, pressing her forehead to his uninjured hand, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. The following morning brought grim clarity. The ambush had been the Choi family's doing, a message, not an assassination attempt, a demonstration that they could reach him even inside his own territory. The private meeting had been a distraction while their real move played out on the road. "They wanted me weakened," Min-ho said from his hospital bed, voice tight with barely restrained fury despite his injuries. "They wanted me distracted, and now they know exactly how to distract me." Ava's stomach dropped. "Me. You," he confirmed grimly. "Which is why, starting today, security around you doubles. No exceptions." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she wasn't some fragile thing needing protection. But the memory of the black car following her through the market silenced the protest before it left her lips. A few days later, Min-ho, against doctors' orders and Do-hyun's protests, insisted on leaving the hospital early, unwilling to remain bedridden while threats circled Ava like vultures. He returned to the estate pale and moving carefully, but present, close, watching over her personally instead of trusting the task entirely to his men. "You should be resting," Ava scolded one evening, finding him at his desk despite his injuries, reviewing security reports with sharp, focused eyes. "I rest better knowing I've done everything I can to keep you safe." She sighed and moved to sit beside him, taking the tablet gently from his hands. "Then let me help. I'm not made of glass, Min-ho. Whatever's coming, I want to face it with you, not hidden away somewhere pretending it isn't happening." He studied her for a long moment, something like awe mixing with the exhaustion in his expression. "Most people run from danger like mine." "Not most people," he agreed, voice soft. "You're really not." That night, for the first time since the gala, he let himself be fully vulnerable with her. Not the powerful boss, not the untouchable heir, but simply a man, wounded and afraid and desperately in love, admitting quietly in the dark that he didn't know how to survive losing her, that the ambush had terrified him more for what it threatened to take than for the injuries themselves. She held him through it, offering no easy reassurances, only her steady presence, and somewhere in the honesty of that night, whatever fear had lingered about the future between them began to dissolve into something far more certain. By the following week, Min-ho's recovery accelerated, fueled by determination, and he privately admitted, by the fierce need to stand between Ava and whatever the Choi family planned next. Intelligence gathered by Do Hyun's network suggested the Chois were preparing a larger move, one timed around an upcoming shipment dispute that threatened to spill into open conflict. "I need to end this before it escalates further," Min-ho told Ava one evening, spreading documents across his desk with restless energy. "Not just for the business, for you. Then let me be part of ending it," she said, surprising him. "Ava, this isn't your world. It became my world the moment you brought me to that gala," she countered, steel in her voice despite the fear still coiled beneath it. "I won't hide while you fight my battles for me. Tell me what I can do." Something shifted in his expression, respect, admiration, love so fierce it nearly stole his breath. "You're certain?" "Completely." Together, they devised a plan, one that used Ava's outsider status as an unexpected advantage. As someone unconnected to the traditional power structures, she could move through spaces the Choi family wouldn't think to monitor, gathering information their well-known guards could never access without raising alarm. It was dangerous. It was reckless. And it was, undeniably, the moment Ava stopped being merely someone Min-ho protected and became someone who fought beside him. The plan required Ava to attend a charity auction hosted by a mutual acquaintance of the Choi family, neutral ground where old rivals mingled under polite pretenses. Min-ho hated the idea of her walking into potential danger without him at her side, but his presence would immediately raise suspicion. So instead, Do Hyun remained close, disguised among the catering staff, while Min-ho monitored everything from a secured vehicle outside. Ava moved through the glittering crowd in a borrowed elegance that still turned heads, her heart pounding beneath practiced composure as she navigated toward Chairman Choi's inner circle, gathering fragments of conversation that meant nothing to the untrained ear but everything to Min-ho's network. She was 3 sentences into a promising conversation with the chairman's nephew when a hand closed around her elbow, firm and unfamiliar. "The girl from the gala," a voice said, low and calculating. She turned to find Chairman Choi himself studying her with cold, assessing eyes. Kang Min-ho's little distraction. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear spiking through her. "Insult me with pretense," Choi said, his grip tightening slightly. "Tell your Kang Min-ho that whatever he thinks he's protecting, I will take it apart piece by piece until there's nothing left worth guarding." Before she could respond, Do Hyun materialized beside them with a tray of champagne, his expression perfectly bland despite the tension radiating off him. "Madam, your car is ready," he said smoothly, giving Choi no room to object without causing a scene. Choi released her arm slowly, a chilling smile spreading across his face. "Run along then, for now." Min-ho was waiting the moment she reached the car, his expression thunderous as Do Hyun relayed what happened. "That's it," he said, voice hard as steel. "I'm done playing this game by his rules." "Min-ho, wait. He touched you," Min-ho said, voice dropping to something dangerously quiet. "He threatened you to your face. There is no version of this where I sit back and allow that to stand." That night marked a turning point neither of them could take back, Min-ho mobilizing every resource at his disposal, calling in favors from allies who owed him decades of loyalty, preparing to move against the Choi family not with subtlety, but with the full, terrifying force of everything he'd built. Ava watched him transform before her eyes, from the soft, careful man who draped his jacket over her shoulders into someone colder, sharper, utterly focused on a single objective, making sure no one who threatened her would live to try again. It frightened her, this glimpse into the man capable of the empire he ruled. But beneath the fear was something else too, an undeniable understanding that this ferocity existed because of how deeply he loved her, not despite it. The following days blurred into careful, tense preparation. Min-ho's people tracked the Choi family's movements, uncovering evidence of illegal dealings that had, until now, remained carefully hidden evidence that, properly leveraged, could dismantle Choi's operation without a single shot fired. "We don't have to go to war," Min-ho explained to Ava late one night, exhaustion evident but eyes sharp with purpose. "We expose him, publicly, undeniably, in front of every ally and enemy who matters. His own family will turn on him once they realize the risk he's brought to their door. If it doesn't work, his jaw tightened. Then we go to war, but I'd rather win this without more blood. By the end of the week, the pieces were in place. A gathering of the region's most powerful families had been arranged, ostensibly to discuss trade agreements, but in truth, the stage upon which Min-ho intended to expose Chairman Choi's illegal dealings in front of the very people whose respect he depended on. Ava, against every protective instinct in Min-ho's body, insisted on being present. If I hide, it proves his threats worked, she argued. I won't give him that satisfaction. He hated it. He agreed anyway because some part of him understood that loving her meant respecting her courage, even when it terrified him. The gathering took place in a private hall draped in understated luxury, powerful men and women exchanging pleasantries that masked years of rivalry and alliance. Ava stood near Min-ho's side, spine straight despite the nerves twisting through her, watching Chairman Choi across the room, his earlier confidence still evident in every calculated smile. When the moment came, Min-ho didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stood, addressed the room with the calm authority that had made him feared for over a decade, and laid out, piece by piece, evidence of Choi's dealings, smuggled goods, falsified contracts, betrayals of trust that stretched back years. The room's temperature shifted palpably as Choi's own allies exchanged uneasy glances, the carefully built image of respectability crumbling under the weight of undeniable proof. "You have no right," Choi began, fury rising, but Min-ho cut him off with a single, cold sentence. "Have every right. You threatened someone under my protection. That ends tonight." Choi's gaze snapped to Ava, hatred burning in his eyes, and for one terrifying moment, she thought he might do something reckless right there in front of everyone. Instead, security, his own family's security, no longer willing to protect a man who'd become a liability, moved in to escort him from the hall, his protest swallowed by the murmur of a room already recalculating its allegiances. It wasn't over, not entirely. Men like Choi rarely accepted defeat gracefully. But the balance of power had shifted decisively and publicly. In Min-ho's favor, later that night, away from the hall, away from politics and danger, Min-ho finally allowed himself to breathe, pulling Ava into his arms with a desperation that spoke of everything he'd been holding back. "It's not completely over," he admitted against her hair. "Men like Choi don't disappear quietly, but tonight I promise you we won." "Won?" she echoed, savoring the word, savoring the warmth of him solid and safe against her. But danger, they would soon learn, had one final desperate card left to play. 3 days later, while Min-ho was consumed with securing the aftermath of Choi's public downfall, Ava disappeared. She had gone, as she often did, to the small market near the estate's outer gate, accompanied by only one guard, a routine trip made 100 times before. But this time, a van blocked the narrow street, and before the guard could react, gas flooded the alley and Ava's world went black. When Min-ho received the call, something inside him that had never truly broken, not through years of violence, not through the loss of his parents, not through any war he'd ever fought, shattered completely. "Find her," he said, voice unrecognizable even to himself, cold and lethal in a way that made even Do-hyun take an involuntary step back. "Find her now, or I will burn this entire city to the ground looking." Search that followed was relentless, sleepless, fueled by a terror Min-ho had never known he was capable of feeling. Every resource, every ally, every favor owed across a decade of careful alliance building was called upon within hours. Choi's remaining loyalists were the obvious suspects. A final, desperate act of revenge from a man who had lost everything and blamed her for it. 12 hours into the search, with no leads and no word, Min-ho stood at the center of his war room, hands braced against the table, staring at maps and reports that offered nothing but silence. "We'll find her," Do-hyun said quietly, though even his usual confidence wavered. "If they've hurt her," Min-ho's voice broke, actually broke, for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. "Do-hyun, I can't." He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear clawing through his chest. "Then we don't stop until we find her," Du-hyun said firmly. You taught me that. Now let's live it. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a low-level courier, once loyal to Choi, who'd grown disillusioned watching his employer's empire collapse and decided self-preservation mattered more than misplaced loyalty. He gave up the location of a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where a small remaining faction of Choi loyalists had taken Ava, hoping to use her as leverage to rebuild what their fallen leader had lost. Min-ho didn't wait for a full tactical plan. He moved the moment he had the address, a small, heavily armed team at his back, adrenaline and fury propelling him forward with single-minded purpose. Inside the warehouse, Ava sat bound to a chair in a dimly lit room, exhausted and frightened but unbroken, chin lifted with the same stubborn defiance that had first caught Min-ho's attention in his own kitchen. He's not going to save you, one of her captors sneered, packing in front of her. Even if he finds this place, it'll be too late. You don't know him, Ava said, voice steadier than she felt. He's already coming. And when he gets here, you should be more worried about that than anything you could do to me. As if summoned by her words, the warehouse door exploded inward. What followed was fast, brutal, and utterly without mercy. Min-ho moved through the chaos with lethal precision. Every ounce of restraint he'd carefully cultivated over years abandoned entirely in favor of pure protective fury. Within minutes, the remaining Choi loyalists were subdued, their brief, desperate rebellion crushed as swiftly as it had begun. He found her in the back room, and the sight of her bruised, exhausted but alive, so undeniably alive, brought him to his knees in front of her chair, hands trembling as he worked frantically at her restraints. I'm here, he said, voice breaking completely now, no composure left to hide behind. I'm here, you're safe, I've got you, Min-ho. Her voice cracked on his name, tears finally spilling free now that the danger had passed, now that she could allow herself to feel everything she'd forced down to survive the last 12 hours. The moment her hands were free, she threw herself into his arms, and he held her like he was afraid she might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in like proof of a miracle he hadn't dared hope for. I thought, he started, then stopped, unable to voice the fear that had consumed him for the past half-day. I know, she whispered against his chest. I knew you'd come. I never stopped believing that. The following days passed in a haze of careful healing, physical wounds tended by private doctors, deeper wounds tended by nothing but time and the steady, unwavering presence of a man who refused to leave her side for longer than absolutely necessary. Choi's remaining network collapsed entirely in the aftermath. Whatever influence he'd once held reduced to nothing under the weight of his own desperate, failed gambit. For the first time since Ava had walked into the Kang estate months ago, true peace settled over the household, fragile, hard-won, but real. A week later, once the worst of her physical injuries had healed, and something resembling normalcy returned, Min-ho found Ava in the garden where they'd first admitted the depth of their feelings, sunlight filtering gently through the trees overhead. Spent my entire life building an empire, he said, coming to stand before her, something nervous and unfamiliar flickering across his usually composed features. Protecting territory, accumulating power, ensuring the Kang name meant something no one could challenge. Me finish, he said gently, and she quieted, watching him with growing anticipation. None of it, not the empire, not the power, not any single thing I've built, has ever mattered to me the way you do. You walked into my kitchen and rearranged everything I thought I understood about my own life. You made me remember what it means to be afraid of losing something, and what it means to fight for something worth keeping. He lowered himself to one knee, producing a small velvet box that seemed impossibly delicate in his powerful hands, and Ava's breath caught entirely. I don't have a gentle life to offer you, he continued, voice thick with emotion. I can't promise you safety without complication, or love without danger woven through it. But I can promise you this, for as long as I live, there will never be a single day you doubt how deeply you are loved, how fiercely you are protected, and how completely you belong exactly where you are. Ava Bello, will you marry me? Tears streamed freely down her face as she nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment, sinking to her knees in front of him instead, cradling his face in her hands. "Yes," she finally managed, voice thick with joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Kiss that followed held none of the desperate hunger of the gala night, none of the fear that had colored so much of their journey together. It held only certainty, only peace, only the quiet, unshakable knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their wedding took place 6 months later, in a garden transformed for the occasion, blending traditions from both their worlds, Korean customs woven seamlessly with vibrant Nigerian colors and music. A celebration of two cultures meeting exactly where love had first brought them together. Ava walked down the aisle in a gown far simpler than the midnight masterpiece from the gala, but somehow far more beautiful, radiant with a happiness that needed no embellishment. Min-ho, watching her approach, felt the same breathless awe he'd felt the first moment she walked into that ballroom, except now it was layered with something even deeper, the profound gratitude of a man who understood exactly how close he'd come to losing the greatest gift his life had ever offered him. "Love you," he whispered as she reached him, unable to wait for the ceremony to say it. "Love you too," she whispered back, and the rest of the world fell away entirely. A year later, in the same garden where he'd proposed, where they'd first admitted the depth of their feelings under starlight and fear, Min-ho knelt again, this time beside Ava as she sat on a garden bench, one hand resting gently over the gentle curve of her stomach, the other tangled with his. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, watching the way wonder and terror mixed openly across his usually unreadable face. "For this." He pressed a gentle kiss to her hand, then to the curve where their child grew. Safe and protected exactly as its mother had always been beneath his watch. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." Empire he'd built still stood, stronger than ever, respected and feared in equal measure. But within the walls of the home they'd built together, none of that mattered nearly as much as this. The woman who had walked fearlessly into a world that should have swallowed her whole, and instead had reshaped it entirely around a love neither of them had ever expected. But both had been brave enough to choose, again and again, no matter the danger. Love, it turned out, truly had no borders, not of language, not of culture, not even of the darkness that had once threatened to consume them both. It had only this: two people, choosing each other unbreakably forever. The garden had changed with the seasons since that afternoon Min-ho knelt beside her, but the light through the cherry trees still fell exactly the way it had the day he'd proposed, soft, golden, patient. Ava sat on the same stone bench now, 7 months pregnant, one hand resting on the swell of her stomach while she watched him pace a few feet away, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and clipped as he closed out the last of the day's business before sunset. "Tell them the meeting waits until tomorrow," he said into the phone, eyes never leaving her. "Nothing tonight is more important than this." He ended the call before whoever was on the other end could argue. "You didn't have to do that," Ava said, amused despite herself. "I know." He crossed to her, lowering himself onto the bench, one arm settling protectively around her shoulders. "I wanted to. Some things, it seemed, never changed." A few weeks later, Do-hyun arrived at the estate with news that made Min-ho's jaw tighten out of old habit. A remaining pocket of Choi loyalists, scattered and diminished, had tried once more to make trouble, this time targeting a shipment route on the city's edge. It was nothing compared to the empire that had once threatened them. Min-ho handled it before nightfall, quietly, efficiently, without ever letting the danger reach the estate gates. He didn't tell Ava the details until it was already resolved. "You used to tell me everything," she said that evening, not quite accusing, watching him loosen his tie by the window. "I used to be reckless with what I let you carry," he admitted, coming to sit beside her, resting his hand over hers on her stomach. "Now I have 2 reasons to protect first and explain later." She couldn't argue with that. Not really. By the end of the month, the estate had transformed again. A nursery built in what used to be a guest room, painted in warm, neutral tones. A mobile of tiny embroidered stars hanging above a crib carved from pale wood. Ava found Min-ho standing in the doorway one night, simply looking at it, something unguarded and disbelieving on his face, the same expression he'd worn the first night she'd fed him a bowl of stew in his own kitchen. "Doing it again," she teased softly from behind him. "Doing what?" Looking at ordinary things like they're miracles. He turned, pulling her gently into his arms. "Everything in this house became a miracle the day you walked into it. I'm only now letting myself believe I get to keep it." Labor came 2 weeks early, in the middle of a rainstorm not unlike the one that had first thrown them together. A strange, quiet symmetry neither of them commented on until much later. Min-ho, who had faced down rival families, survived an ambush and burned an empire to the ground to get her back, found his hands shaking harder in that hospital hallway than they ever had holding a weapon. "Breathe," Do-hyun told him, steering him back to a chair for the third time. "You survive gunfights better than this." "This is worse," Min-ho said, and meant it completely. Their daughter was born just before dawn, and when the nurse placed her, small and furious and undeniably theirs, into Ava's arms, Min-ho stood frozen at the bedside, staring down at the two of them like the whole of his carefully built world had finally arrived at its true center. "She has your eyes," Ava murmured, exhausted and glowing. "She has your stubbornness," he said, voice thick. "I heard her crying before she was even fully out." They named her Aisha Minyi, a name that belonged to both of their worlds at once, the way the child herself already did. That night, once the hospital room had quieted and Ava slept with their daughter curled against her chest, Min-ho sat in the chair beside the bed, watching them both with the same fierce, wordless vigilance he'd once reserved for enemies. Only now the thing he guarded so carefully wasn't territory or power. It was this. Just this. A woman who had walked fearlessly into his dangerous world and made it soft enough to hold a family, and a daughter who would grow up knowing, without ever having to be told, that she was loved before she'd even taken her first breath. Love, Kang Min-ho had learned the hard way, didn't erase danger or undo the past or promise an easy road ahead. But it made every battle worth fighting. And it gave a man like him, who had once believed he was made only for war, somewhere soft to finally come home to.